headlines this hour. With her prime minister nominee named, political focus is now on President Park Geun-hye's cabinet and top office shakeups widely expected this week. Thousands of Korean police and prosecutors raid a religious compound for a second time on Wednesday in their futile search for a businessman/cult leader linked to the April ferry disaster. And Korea's job growth slows for the third straight month in May. The finance ministry attributes the slowdown to the April ferry disaster.
Hello and welcome to Primetime News. I'm Sean Lim.
And I'm Kang Tae-ri. Thanks for joining us tonight. President Park Geun-hye's nomination of a new prime minister on Tuesday was the first domino in an imminent reshuffle of her cabinet as well as her presidential staff.
Political watchers believe a series of nominations and appointments will be made before the week is up. Our presidential office correspondent Chae-yu-sun has more.
Contrary to earlier predictions, President Park is expected to carry out reshuffles of her cabinet and the presidential office before departing for Central Asia next Monday. That seems to be the consensus, as the swift move would be made to avoid a further delay in government restructuring and public service reforms, which the president promised in the aftermath of April's ferry disaster. On Wednesday, her spokesperson Min Kyung-wook said there was a possibility that changes could take place this week. Under normal circumstances, the president would wait for the prime minister nominee to be confirmed by the National Assembly at the end of this month or the start of next before making such a wide-scale change. But since the president cannot afford to waste any more time, her nominee Moon Chang-guk will likely take part in the process of choosing new cabinet ministers, while current Prime Minister Chung Hong-won would make the official recommendations. The speculation is that the nation's finance minister, who also acts as the deputy prime minister, will likely be replaced by the president's close aide and former ruling party floor leader Choi Kyung-hwan. Another potential candidate is current Presidential Economic Affairs Secretary Cho Won-dong. The ministers of Security and Education, both of whom came under fire for inconsiderate behavior after the ferry accident, may get the axe. It's speculated that someone from academia could take on the role of education minister, who will also sit as the second deputy prime minister. A number of President Park's senior secretaries, including ones in charge of the economy, culture, and political affairs, may either be named into the cabinet or given a different post. Meanwhile, her chief of staff and senior secretary for state planning are widely expected to stay put for now. Chae-yu-sun, Arirang News.
The owner of the solo ferry that sank back in April, which killed hundreds of people, is still on the run. And on this Wednesday morning, thousands of police raided the religious compound for a second time, where he was believed to be, but didn't exactly find all they were looking for. Yu Lian reports.
Some 6,000 police have raided a religious compound in Anseong, south of Seoul, to arrest two women suspected of helping the fugitive de facto owner of this Haedo ferry, Yoo Byung-eun, evade authorities. They have yet to find the two women, but they did arrest other church followers suspected of playing a key role in aiding and abetting the fugitive ferry owner. Yoo is a founding member of the Salvation Sect religious group, which is believed to have acted as the control tower for his escape. The massive operation comes less than 24 hours after President Park Geun-hye lashed out against the joint investigation team for taking too long to find Yoo.
지금까지의 검거 방식을 재점검하고 다른 추가적인 방법은 없는지 모든 수단과 방법을 검토해서 반드시 법의 심판을 받도록 해야 할 것입니다.
The Saenuri ferry owner has not been spotted in public since the tragic disaster occurred in April. Prosecutors say he has previously attempted to smuggle himself out of the country by offering to pay brokers a whopping 10 billion won, or roughly $10 million. Hours after President Park's comments a day earlier, prosecutors held an emergency meeting with police, military, and government officials and decided to have the Navy watch over the coast surrounding Korea to prevent the fugitive from fleeing the country. This is the first time that the Navy has been called on to take part in an operation designed specifically to prevent someone from being smuggled out of the nation. Yurian, Arirang News.
It's been a week since the opening of this month's extraordinary parliamentary session. With no results, though, to speak of yet, the ruling Saenuri party's floor leader has proposed a set of measures to bring government reforms in motion. Kim Yong-gil has more on the new process that may cut through the legislative gridlock.
Addressing the full assembly and members of President Park Geun-hye's cabinet on Wednesday, ruling Saenuri Party floor leader Lee Wan-gu said his party will be at the forefront of reforming the government and party politics.
I propose the establishment of 3 special committees for reform. Committees to reform politics, to reform the government, and to take care of the people's livelihoods. These committees will provide a master plan to reform our country.
Earlier this week, rival party floor leaders held their first weekly meeting and shared the common view that the government should spur efforts to restructure the nation's safety management system. Floor leader Lee also proposed forming a joint consultative body between the Saenuri Party and the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy.
The consultative body would discuss all agenda items, ranging from public livelihood bills to sending special envoys to North Korea.
If the joint consultative body is launched, lawmakers expect it to speed up initiatives to aid parliamentary operations. Currently in the spotlight is the Green Light Law, which aims to make it easier for bills to be voted on. Any bill that party floor leaders and the Assembly Speaker designate as a green light bill could be sent straight for a vote on the Assembly floor. On Thursday, the floor leader of the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy, Park Young-sun, will deliver a keynote speech at the plenary session. Kim Yong-gil, Arirang News.
The concerted push to restart the long-stalled 6-party nuclear talks appears to be gaining traction. Over in Beijing, the chief nuclear envoys from South Korea and China met yesterday, while in Washington, officials from Japan and the United States were sitting down for talks. Hwang Sung-hee has the details.
As Chinese President Xi Jinping readies for his visit to South Korea next month, Seoul's chief nuclear envoy Hwang Jung-guk and his Chinese counterpart Woo Da-wei met Tuesday in Beijing to discuss a resumption of the long-stalled 6-party nuclear talks. Speaking to reporters on the condition of anonymity, a high-ranking South Korean official said Seoul, Washington, and Beijing share the same view on the need to prevent Pyongyang from further development of its nuclear capacity. The 6-party talks, aimed at ending Pyongyang's nuclear program, involve the 2 Koreas, the United States, China, Japan, and Russia, but have been at a standstill for more than 5 years. China, as North Korea's biggest ally, has pushed for an early resumption of the talks, while South Korea, the United States, and Japan have said the North must take practical steps to denuclearize before they will return to the negotiating table. But this trilateral cooperation has recently been called in question following Japan's individual dialogue with North Korea. Speaking with his U.S. counterpart Glenn Davies in Washington on Tuesday local time, Japanese chief nuclear envoy Junichi Ihara explained Tokyo's agreement with Pyongyang, which centers on reinvestigating the fate of Japanese abductees to the north. According to the Kyodo news agency, Ihara stressed the importance of the trilateral alliance in countering North Korea's nuclear ambitions, but said that the abduction issue required separate discussions. And as North Korea accelerates diplomacy of its own, experts say South Korea should make use of the Chinese leader's upcoming visit as an opportunity to outline what it wants from Pyongyang in exchange for restarting dialogue. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
Korea's job creation has slowed for the 3rd straight month in May, and the finance ministry is attributing this slowdown to the April ferry disaster. Our Hwang Ji-hye tells us more.
The Korean economy added 410,000 jobs in May from a year ago, bringing the number of employed in the nation to almost 26 million. But that marks 3 straight months of slowing job growth and the lowest gain since last July. Statistics Korea says slumping private consumption due to the deadly ferry disaster in April resulted in the lower growth in employment last month. It's no surprise then that the nation's service industry, which includes the retail, lodging, and restaurant sectors, added only around 320,000 jobs in May from a year earlier, far lower than more than 500,000 created in the previous month. Job creation in the leisure activities sector even dropped by 17,000. The statistics agency said earlier that service sector production had dropped 1% from the previous month, while retail sales were down more than 1.5%. That, the agency said, is a reflection of the lackluster domestic demand brought on by the disaster. While the government has cautioned that slowing consumer spending caused by the ferry tragedy could hurt the nation's economic recovery, the finance ministry says it's not considering an extra budget to further stimulate the economy. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
In today's in-depth segment, we're talking about where the Chinese economy stands and, of course, what that means for the Korean exporters. And to give an expert's point of view, we have Professor Shin Se-dong joining us from Sookmyung Women's University in the studio. Welcome to our studio, first of all. Now, let's start off with the May trade figure between Korea and China. Korea's outbound shipment to China shrinking by more than 9% on you. What's behind this big drop?
Two factors, I think, are behind the performance, this May. One is the sluggishness in Chinese economic growth. The early this year, the growth rate was 7.9%, and in the middle, it came down to 7.5%, and many people expect that they might go down below the 7%. So, China has been growing more than 10% for a long period of time, and now all of a sudden, the Chinese economic growth rate has been falling from 8% to almost 7%. That is one major, factor. And the second thing, I think, is the weakest, the Chinese yuan currency. It used to be 187 won per yuan a couple of quarters ago. Now it is down to 163%, so almost 8% in less than 6 months.
So do you think this trend is going to continue for some time, with China especially trying to rebalance from its export-driven economy to one that more focuses on domestic consumption?
Yeah, of course. First, the thing is, I have a little studies on that, and if there is a 10% depreciation of yuan against Korean currency, usually there's a 20% decline in export. So, assuming that the yuan has been depreciated 8% throughout this first half of this year, I think we would expect that at least a 15% decline in Korean exports to China, right? So they will appear in the second half of this year.
So what does this say for Korean exporters? I mean, which sectors are likely to take a hit?
More than half of, of our exports to China is kind of a processing. In other words, we send our materials and equipment, and then reassembled and reprocessed there, and then re-export it to third countries. So most of the commodities that Korea export to China is kind of, we call it the processed goods or processing goods. And those, processing goods are supplied mostly by the big companies like, Samsung and the motor corporations. So I think that the major companies would be pretty much affected by this trend.
So is this a strategy that we should continue with China being able to support a lot of Korea's exports? Does that leave us in a vulnerable position, or should we just adapt a little bit to the growth rate changes?
Right. That's one of the points, the Chinese government is trying to, because they want to reduce the reliance upon Korean processing goods in order to increase their contents of their own goods, right? Exactly. So naturally, I think our export to China will decline. So I think we have to change our strategy from mostly the processing goods into targeting to the final consumers in China.
All right, well, Professor Shin, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today.
Glad to be here.
Thank you.
There's a recent marriage trend that's well underway here in Seoul.
That's right. According to new statistics released by the city of Seoul, 15.5% of couples who married in the city last year were made up of a younger man and older women. That's nearly 7 percentage points higher than 20 years earlier. The average age at which people were tying the knot has also changed as well. Men got hitched at the average age of 32.6 years, about 4 years higher than back in 1993, and women got married at 30.4 years old, nearly 5 years higher than it was 20 years ago. So I mean, I certainly see this trend around myself. Ash, well, 2 of my friends got married to a younger man last year.
Right, and I just thought it was some of the dramas or some of the movies playing up this idea, but I guess it's really being now reflected in the numbers.
I mean, yes, they do help, but I think, you know, with more women working longer and in higher positions nowadays, people are sort of, you know, comfortable with that idea.
Yeah, it's certainly nice to be mothered for a while, but I'm not really sure if all men can do that for the rest of their lives.
Okay.
All right. Well, let the countdown begin. 100 days from today, the northwestern port city of Incheon will host the 2014 Asian Games.
And our Kwon So-ah reports on the preparations and what we can expect from this fall's big event.
Incheon, a port city in northwestern Korea that boasts the nation's third largest population, is gearing up to host the 17th Asian Games this fall.
I'm very excited since the events take place in my neighborhood.
I look forward to the games, as I have never watched such a big event up close.
The Asian Games first came to Korea in 1986 when they were hosted in Seoul and then again in Busan in 2002. Incheon was selected as the third Korean host city 7 years ago. Now, with 100 days to go before the big event, how prepared is the city? The city's new landmark Incheon Asiad Main Stadium was completed last month. 16 of the 49 stadiums that will be used for the games are newly constructed, while the rest have been remodeled. The city spent roughly $2.2 billion preparing for the games.
As an Incheon citizen, I do have my worries. I think it was too much of a financial burden for the city to build new stadiums.
Hosting such a high-profile event comes with risks, but the Korea Institute for International Economic Policy says the Incheon Games have the potential to generate an economic impact worth $1.3 billion and could create 270,000 new jobs.
Although we have financial difficulties, when the Incheon Asian Games are held successfully, Incheon will not only become a hub in Northeast Asia, but will grow into a global city.
The Incheon Asian Games Organizing Committee is trying to make this year's event the most economical, efficient, and eco-friendly one yet, an event that will serve as a role model for developing nations in Asia.
Diversity shines here is the slogan for the 2014 Incheon Asian Games. The city of Incheon says it will do its best to display the diversity of Asia and help Asia reach its development potential during the event. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
The Iraqi government has declared a state of emergency after Islamist militants took control of the country's second largest city.
With more on this, we now turn to Paul Yi at the News Center. Paul, the Iraqi security forces have all but abandoned the city of Mosul at this point, but where does that leave the civilians who are trapped in this growing conflict?
Well, the Sunni militant group has forced hundreds of thousands of people out of their homes, with new figures showing that as many as 500,000 residents have fled the city. The second largest city in Iraq, Mosul, turned into a battlefield on Tuesday and is now under the control of armed Islamist fighters. They also set police stations on fire and released hundreds of inmates from a high-security prison. The group, an offshoot of al-Qaeda, is called the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, otherwise known as ISIS. It signifies another victory for the rebels, prompting concerns from the international community that the shift in power may threaten the entire region. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said he was gravely concerned about the events in Iraq. According to the UN, sectarian violence just last month in the country killed nearly 800 people. And turning now to Tokyo, where the Japanese government has launched a protest against China's move to register the Nanjing massacre with the United Nations Heritage List. Japan says it doesn't deny that the brutal wartime massacre happened, but that Beijing has exaggerated the death toll in its UNESCO report. Japanese Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga demanded on Wednesday that China remove its application for the Nanjing massacre in UNESCO's Memory of the World program. He said he regrets China is using the United Nations cultural body as a political playing field. In response, the Chinese government said there was a need to remember history, cherish peace, and avert similar atrocities from happening again. Japanese troops battling Chinese forces captured Nanjing in late 1937. China says in the weeks that followed, Japanese troops killed more than 300,000 people. A post-war Allied tribunal, however, put the death toll at around 142,000. And finally, angry taxi drivers in France have been protesting against unlicensed cab services that use a rapidly growing mobile app called Uber. Traditional taxi drivers gathered in the Paris airport as part of a nationwide movement that considers these emerging new driver-for-hire services as a threat to their livelihood. Taxi drivers scuffled with chauffeurs of private cars and motorbikes, accusing them of stealing their clients while citing a lack of regulations and fair taxes. The San Francisco-based company Uber, which is backed by Goldman Sachs and Google, allows customers to book and pay for a taxi using an app on their smartphones. Other key European cities such as Rome, Berlin, and London are also bracing for traffic problems as more taxi drivers join the protests. That wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome to Primetime Sports. I'm Stephen Che. We kick things off with the World Cup, which is just 2 days away, and South Korea is headed to Brazil after having wrapped up its pre-tournament training camp in Miami, Florida. Now they're expected to arrive at base camp in Foz do Iguaçu on Thursday morning and spend the next few days training and acclimating to the climate. They'll prepare for their first official match against Russia next week. Now, it's a crucial matchup. ESPN calls it the most important of Group H because if it's assumed Belgium will advance, it'll likely determine who will head to the knockout phase with them. Now, South Korea and Russia meet at Arena Pantanal in Cuiabá this upcoming Wednesday at 7 a.m. Korea time. And with matches taking place so early in the morning in Korea, the national team's official supporters, the Red Devils, are faced with a dilemma. Because the matches overlap with the morning rush hour, they have to be mindful of commuters. In addition, their usual stopping ground at Seoul Plaza is currently occupied by the Sewol Ferry Victims Memorial. But the Red Devils are looking into other locations, and once they choose one, rest assured they'll be cheering hard for Team Korea. And rounding the bases, let's get to Wednesday's top KBO matchup between the LG Twins and Lotte Giants. Now it's rained out in Seoul, but it's play ball in the south. Now we go to the fourth. It's LG starter Im Jung-woo. He throws it away. Sonasop, he scores for Lotte. It's 1-0. Now we fly on over to the sixth inning. LG's Chung Sung-hoon, he triples. Then Jung Woo-yoon, he connects and hits him home. It's tied 1-1. Now we fly to the bottom of the inning. Coming up right now, it's Choi Jun-seok at the plate. He puts Lotte ahead with the double. Sonasop, he homers later in the eighth inning. And Lotte goes on to win this one over LG 4-1. And now looking at the other games, we have Kia defeating Hanwha 9-2. Meanwhile, NC and Tusan and Samsung and Nexen had their games rained out. Well, that's all I have for now. This has been Stephen Che. I'll see you back here later for more from the world of sports.
From whirlwinds to hail, we're experiencing unusual conditions.
Tell me about it. And tornadoes like yesterday and today near Seoul. And of course, Kim Bo-kyung is joining us from the Weather Center to tell us more about this unusual weather conditions.
Hey guys, the rather random weather conditions are due to the unstable atmosphere. Plus, the nation continues to be at the edge of a high pressure system from the East Sea. So all of this is leading to heavy sporadic showers accompanied by thunder and even hail at times. Things should gradually clear up later tonight. However, it will resume tomorrow morning, and we're looking at another 5 to 40 millimeters in most parts of the country. After tomorrow, the atmosphere will settle back to normal, and clear and sunny skies are forecast for the rest of the week. At the moment, the rain has brought down temperatures and it may feel rather chilly outside, so an umbrella and a light cardigan is a must when heading outdoors. Taking a look at Thursday's readings, Seoul tops out at 27 degrees, while Daegu and Gwangju hit the mid-20s. On to other places, Jeju peaks at 23 degrees, Dokdo and Mount Kumgang reach 18 and 19. And that's all from me at this hour, but I'll be back with more after midnight.
Bo-kyung, thank you very much. And that does it for this Wednesday edition of Primetime News.
Thanks for watching, and make sure to join me for the late night edition as well. Good night.